Hey, folks, this is the Poor Sports Seattle podcast. I'm Casey McLean. By the way, come see me do stand up. Go to see me on Instagram. If you're in Portland, I'm Mr. Portland lately. Barely go to Portland, and I'll be there for the third time in 5 weeks with Ron on Hirschberg at Helium Comedy Club here in a little over a week throughout the whole draft weekend. So if if the urge hits you, if it's day 3, the Seahawks have frustrated you by not taking an offensive lineman or a quarterback for too long, come out and see me and Ron on Hirschberg at Helium in Portland. And go to CaseyMcLeanComedy.com and follow me at Casey McLean Comedy. I post a bunch of stuff there. I will be at Bickerson's Brewhouse in Renton, May 17th, and Beat Drop Event Center and Kitchen, something like that, in Lacey. Headlining both those shows. Tickets are for sale on Eventbrite.com. Today's guest is Dan Viens of the Seahawks Forever podcast, a podcast that I listen to semi-religiously. I would say he's putting out 5 podcasts a week just about right now, and I'm like 4.5 to 5 a week. I'm catching them, baby. And he did give me, I will say, we reference it, or I reference it a couple times, but he gave me an advanced list of his top 10 quarterbacks, so we referenced that a little bit. That episode's out. You can go check out his top 10 quarterbacks, and he explains here why he's got a guy like Quinn Ewers a little bit lower than I do. We talk about Shedeur Sanders, what it would take, how it would be possible for the Seahawks to draft Shedeur Sanders, what kind of apocalypse would have to happen for Shedeur Sanders to end up with the Seahawks. We also talked about what the Seahawks are going to do at offensive line, some sleeper draft picks that he thinks he'd like to see the Seahawks make, and I give my opinions on those same things. Anyways, follow him at Seahawks Forever on YouTube, on Twitter/X, whatever we're calling it these days. Please enjoy this conversation with Dan Viens. So first off, you gave me a sneak peek at your QB rankings, which was exciting for me to see and stuff. I feel like Seattle Seahawks fans have wanted the Seahawks to be drafting quarterbacks since long before Russell Wilson lost favor in Seattle as a backup, as a next quarterback of the future, as a future trade chip. There's a segment of fans that have wanted that, and they've just never obliged. As a team, they've never obliged. And I feel like you, where every year you're like looking at the quarterback class going, where's that late round value? And it never happens. And this year it seemed like it was going to happen. And then they signed Sam Darnold. They signed Drew Lock. I actually saw that some details came out on the contract, but I didn't read them. And then they had traded for Sam Howell. Are we facing another year where it's going to be like a 6th, 7th round or undrafted free agent guy that is the guy the Seahawks bring in as that next quarterback that really isn't the next quarterback? It's like a lottery ticket.
Yeah, I think so. I felt much differently until they signed Drew Lock. You know, when it was just Darnold, it made all the sense in the world to grab one of the guys from this class, especially maybe a guy out of that sort of second tier where it's a group of players that I think has some good upside. You know, I think there's 7 or 8 players in this class that I'm a little bit higher on than others that have starter upside if you put them in the right situation. And I thought it would have made all the sense in the world in the event that Darnold just is doesn't take the next step that we all anticipate and hope he'll take, and so do the Seahawks. That's why they signed him. He's not a stopgap. You know, they brought Sam Darnold in because they think he can be a franchise quarterback. I'm convinced of that. But it still would have made a lot of sense, especially one of the guys in this class that might require a little more development time, a Quinn Ewers or a Jalen Milroe, someone like that. But you go and you sign Drew Lock, and it's not a prohibitive contract at all. It's 2 years, $5 million if he maxes it out. It's basically he's making about the same money as Sam Howell, really, at the end of the day, that it wouldn't preclude them from replacing him or moving on from him if for some reason it's not a fit or he gets hurt or they find a guy that they like better. It's just that now, for the first time that I can ever remember, we're sitting here in April and the Seahawks have a 4-deep quarterback room.
Mhm.
4.5 deep if you count John Reese Plumlee, and they've never done that. Shoot, they don't even add a third quarterback in training camp sometimes, and so a guy they're familiar with in Locke and a guy that's in the prime of his career and has shown he can come off the bench and win a game or two for you in 2 different locations now. It makes zero sense to use top 100 draft capital on a quarterback to me now in a class where I really like the top 100 and I want some more value out of that. So I'm right back to where I am as you touched on every single year with John Schneider, looking for that 7th rounder, which they do have 2 picks at the end of the 7th round, and it might make some sense there to take a guy that you think you can develop.
I've noticed that, I'm sure you have too, that like a lot of throughout the draft process, there will be guys that'll get like, this guy's a 3rd round grade, a 4th round grade, a 5th round grade, but the quarterbacks tend to clump up at the beginning of the draft, first 2-3 rounds, and then there's usually a large gap where there's not a ton of quarterbacks taken until 5th, 6th, 7th round, right? And obviously we saw the probably the most extreme example of that last year when those 6 quarterbacks went in the top 12. Is there a chance that there's going to be a guy, because and I'm gonna your list will have come out, so I'm not spoiling anything. You have Quinn Ewers 9th. If I were to make a ranking, which is a significantly less informed ranking, I would have him higher than that. So if I see a guy like that with a 3rd round grade, it reminds me of years where guys have fallen. Can he be a 6th, 7th round pick that the Seahawks go after, you think, and with a 3rd round value potentially?
So what happens with quarterbacks, right? It's desperation and need. Like you throw your perception of what you think a quarterback should be graded at as far as round value, you throw it out the window. And it gets a little frustrating sometimes in talking to fans about quarterbacks, which is a position I've always been passionate about. And most fans are too, because it's the easiest one to sort of think you understand it, right? And I don't mean to talk down, or I'm not smarter than anyone else. I've just been around the game and I've been around quarterbacks for a long time. I've always kind of fancied myself as someone who can look at the position objectively, and that's hard for some fans to do. Is I get a lot of this, I'll put a mock draft out where they take one of those kids in the 3rd round, and I'll get a lot of like, that's ridiculous, what a reach, what a waste of a pick, he's a 6th rounder at best. Well, how do you know that? You haven't watched, you haven't grinded the tape. You haven't met with the kid. You haven't watched him work out. You haven't talked to his coaches. You haven't done that stuff. You don't make a living doing it. And then you just can't, you have to take those guys when you can take them, if you think they have a shot to develop. And it becomes less where I think he belongs and more, how can we get him? And if we don't take him here, are we going to get another chance to take him when we come back around in the next round? I think the best example of that is Shedeur Sanders. I don't think he's a 1st round graded quarterback in any year. I think he's a very ordinary player who's had some extraordinary expectations placed on him because of his dad, right? And how, the name recognition. But to answer your question about Quinn Ewers, I have 9th. That doesn't mean I don't like him. I've liked Quinn Ewers for a long time and been higher on him than most. And the connections to John Schneider have been there for a long time, and they're pretty undeniable. It's more of reflection of, I think some other guys in this class, as they've gone through the process and I've gotten to know them better, have elevated their profile a little bit, where Ewers, I think, has just kind of kept him where it was. And it's also a reflection of like, I just have a hard time really wrapping my head around who he is and who he can be. Like, I see the upside. I'm just not quite as sure he's going to get there. And some of that has to do with personality and demeanor. Like, I place a lot of emphasis on that when it comes to quarterbacks. I believe in moxie and, having an edge to you. His is probably the Gruden camp that I'm most looking forward to, because I want to see how he handles all that stuff. And it's possible that after I watch that, I might feel like I should bump him up the list a little bit. That certainly happened with Will Howard for me. Like, that Gruden piece that he did was as impressive as any of those that I've seen over the years. Kind of reminding me of Russell Wilson's, where I didn't know a lot about Russ going into that. And then, the time he spent with Gruden just really changed my opinion of him and elevated his profile in my mind. So, I think it's a more interesting class than people are giving credit for. And also the idea that, well, because it's an uncertain class, you should stay away from it because next year's going to be better, right? If I had $10 for every time I've heard that in my life,
Sure.
you cannot count on that, and that's actually less reliable now with the impact of the transfer portal and NIL than it's ever been. You just don't know. And
that's actually a thing about Quinn Ewers that I'm curious about, because it was confusing to me when he declared for the draft. It made sense to me because, like, go figure out, get some intel, see what the reaction is to you declaring or whatever. I know, like 2 years ago, Cam Ward declared for the draft, and then went back. And by the way, I want to talk about Cam Ward in a little bit because I know you're a Washington State fan, and I find his rise from, like, my memory is they were saying, like, 7th round grade. People were mocking him for thinking he could get a $1 million NIL deal, to the presumptive number 1 overall pick is a fascinating climb to me. But Quinn Ewers, it's very surprising to me. He's a guy that had eligibility left that probably could have gone. Now, especially, we know he probably could have gone and made a couple $1 million that he probably won't make this year as a pro. And I understand the, like, hyper competitive, wanting to get to the highest level and all that stuff, and I appreciate that, and that's actually something I would value in a quarterback. If I'm Quinn Ewers' dad, I'm like, go back to college, get your extra $2.5 million or whatever that's guaranteed. Do you think Quinn Ewers got bad advice, or is he just hyper competitive and wants to play at the highest level?
It's a great question, and I think it would be it probably has been an important part of the process for these teams trying to get to know him. It's probably one of the first things they asked him. He certainly wasn't. I don't think he was going to be welcome back at Texas for another year. Sure. I think they were going to move on from that no matter what, and that doesn't mean they don't like Quinn. If you watch the combine during his throwing session when they had Sark up there with DJ, and I think it sounds like, he's pretty passionate about Quinn Ewers and believes in him. He just had the luxury and the rare opportunity to have a guy like Arch Manning also. I think it speaks to Quinn's competitiveness that he went back to Texas last year, because I'm quite sure that he probably could have cashed in and gone elsewhere and paved the road for Arch to be the starter there. I think it says a lot about him and how he handled that too, especially after being pulled in the one game when he got off to the bad start. And everybody online thought, well, here we go. Here's the Arch Manning era. It begins now. And Sark stuck Quinn back in. He almost let him back, and he played well the rest of the year. And, the rest is history. They almost won a national title. I have to believe that he got feedback from the league when he put his name in that he was going to be, because there's 3 ratings, right? The league advisory council will come back and say, we think you have a shot at being a first round pick, or we think you'll be a day 2 pick, or go back to school. That's the range. They don't say we think you're going to be a 4th or a 5th rounder.
Right.
He had to have gotten feedback from them that they thought he was going to go on day 2. And I tried not to consider that in my rankings. But I do think that's kind of where that group sits, and especially the 3rd round. I think it's going to get really interesting when it comes to the quarterbacks, because I think it's possible that all those guys start flying off the board, and he could certainly be one of them. So, at the end of the day, maybe it's a gamble that he loses, because he probably could have gone and gotten $2 or $3 million by transferring. I mean, if Carson Beck got whatever he reportedly got, a couple $1 million and another sports car to go to Miami, I think wasn't it reported that he got $4 million to go to
I think that's
Miami?
Right. Yeah.
I think they would have rather given that money to Quinn Ewers than Carson Beck. And so I think that was out there for him. So I think it is a notch in his favor. I really do.
Oh, one last thing, but as I'm somewhat fixated on Quinn Ewers just because I've liked him since he was a very young college player. I gave a comp to you. I debuted it to you. I don't know if I told you that I was debuting it to you, but I didn't want to say it publicly until I had somebody sign off on it, because I'm not a quarterback expert. I made a Quinn Ewers comp to Geno Smith because I think that Geno has unappreciated athleticism. I think Ewers also has unappreciated athleticism. They both have, I think, like, very good arm talent. And then also kind of have this, like, Geno's was different coming out of college, but, like, there's just questions about, like, is it going to work mentally for these guys? Like, are they
Yeah.
do they have what it takes to be a quarterback mentally? And I had this conversation with a buddy of mine recently because we were talking about quarterbacks, and I was like, Cam Newton had all the talent in the world. And I'm not even saying this as a human being, Cam Newton should be able to do all these things I'm saying, but you need a quarterback that's not distracted by anything. You need a guy who is the governor, who is a politician, who never shows a shaky hand. Cam Newton is a normal human being with normal human being interests, and that's not what you can accept out of a quarterback. That a guy has to be a psychopath. And right. I don't know if Quinn Ewers or Geno Smith early in his career were enough of psychopaths, of the CEO mentality that you need. And so that's can you grade my comp of Geno Smith to Quinn Ewers?
It's interesting. I do think there are some similarities there. Yeah. And it's a big part of the puzzle for me with Quinn. It's we've heard John Schneider talk in the run up to the year that they drafted Russell Wilson. He uses the phrase tilt the room. Like, a quarterback has to have a special energy about him and a special aura. And it's one of the reasons I love these Gruden things is you get a little bit of a taste of that. Like, I was completely underwhelmed by Seth Hennigan and his personality in his episode. And even Riley Leonard just seemed like while there are things I like about his game, he came across like a junior high school kid to me. Like, he's got some maturing to do. I don't know what that's all about. But when it comes to Quinn, he is a little quieter, but yet his entire life he has been looked at and expectations have been placed upon him. Highest rated recruit ever, a perfect recruiting score by 24/7 when he came out. And then, having to play in front of Arch and all those things. I think that certainly hardens you or sharpens you. And I think when it comes to the mental aspect of the game, as you mentioned, I think when he gets up and does that whiteboard stuff, when we see his Gruden episode, I think he's going to kill it. Like you can, there are some who criticize Steve Sarkisian's offense, and he certainly adapted it back to the college game. It's not really a true pro offense. My God, there's way too many screens in it for me. But it's a complex offense, and it's one that requires full field reads. And I think he's probably going to kill that whiteboard stuff. And that's why I say, I've never seen him in that element, just because he might not really come across as dynamic in an interview like we're doing here. Behind closed doors, when it's time to watch film and do the football stuff, he may be much, much different. And so It's still, at the end of the day, if we get into this draft and the Seahawks get to 92 after everything I've just said, and they've checked enough boxes and feel good about what they've done up until that point, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if they take Quinn Ewers, because he has been on John Schneider's radar for a long time, dating all the way back to when they drafted JSN, and he name dropped him that night after the first round in their press conference, to the fact that he's being trained by Mike McCarthy now, and they're really close, and so he's going to get all the intel in the world. Wouldn't surprise me at the end of this whole thing at all. And then they move on from Sam Howell, and we carry 3 quarterbacks this year.
Yeah, which is, by the way, something they historically, or at least in the past several years, have not done, which is kind of interesting to me because, especially with the Clint Kubiak offense coming in and this presumption that there's going to be a true fullback. So, not a tight end that fills in that spot every now and then, or an H-back type that kind of can swing between both. But if there is a true fullback on the roster, I'm constantly, this is maybe too much of a thing, I think about too much. What is it, 45 guys active on game day? You don't have that many extra spots on your roster to devote to. So a Quinn Ewers is going to be third emergency quarterback, not on that 45. Jalen Milroe, who you and I have talked about a little bit in DMs, makes sense as a guy to come in and actually be in that 45 and have some time to have some downs, have some packages for him. But if you got to devote something to that fullback, if you need more edge rushers, especially as you don't know what Uchenna Nwosu's health is going to be like, you start to run out of those extra spots, those reserve spots, and I get a little worried about I think you're almost trading the idea of a third quarterback on that active roster, that Jalen Milroe kind of Cordell Stewart spot that I think he could fill. That would be really interesting. You're trading that for a fullback, which to me that feels like a bad trade to me. But it's not my choice to make, obviously.
Right. At least with Nick Ballore, he could play linebacker if you
Sure.
needed him to, right? And
And
there's a little
special
bit of
teams
versatility
like
there,
crazy,
right?
right? Like that's yeah, that's I mean, and you will have those guys on special teams, but we can move on from. I do want to briefly talk about Cam Ward because it is interesting to
Yeah.
me the ascent he's had, and also to have Cam Ward go. He goes to Washington State from was Incarnate Word. Is that
Yep.
that was his first stop?
A college I had never heard of until we had signed him in the transfer portal. Yeah.
Right. And then he goes to Miami and has like a great year at Miami. And I mean, I actually didn't he didn't get a lot of lasting criticism for sitting out the second half of his bowl game, which I thought was pretty good progress for our like the journalism around college sports was that he didn't get like lasting criticism. There were people that criticized him. I don't think anyone's holding them that against him at this point. But so the Washington State Cougars obviously have had a pretty crazy couple of years. The Pac-12 dissolves or whatever, shrinks down to 2 teams. I can't think of the coach's name before Jake Dickert off the top of my head, but he gets let go.
And Nick Rolovich.
Nick Rolovich goes through a bunch of controversy, but what is it about? So Jake Dickert brings in Cam Ward and John Mateer, brings in these 2 guys off, essentially the scrap heap, who now become, I mean, I don't know what Mateer is going to look like in the NFL if he's an Eric Crouch type, but as a college quarterback, this dude is amazing. What is it? Is it the magic of Jake Dickert developing these guys or finding these guys? Is it just good luck? Is it someone else that's still on the staff? What's going to happen at Washington State now?
Yeah, I think you have to give Eric Morris credit for Cam Ward because they had the relationship, right, from Incarnate Word. Was he the head coach there, I think? No. He was the offensive coordinator. Now I can't remember. Mateer, I don't know the ins and outs of who really was behind his recruiting. I think they just got lucky on Mateer. Like, he was a guy that just wasn't recruited very hard. And they probably liked the toughness and the running ability and certainly the raw arm talents there. He has some things to clean up mechanically. I think a little side note. I think Mateer is going to be an NFL quarterback. I think he has that it factor, absolutely, and I think he's a guy that lifts up the rest of your team and carries guys with him, and I think that game translates perfectly to the modern NFL. He just needs to clean up a couple things and mechanically and get a little bit more accurate. But it's there. I think he has a shorter development curve to being an efficient NFL passer than Jalen Milroe does, for example, with maybe 70 cents on the dollar athletic ability or ability to run the football. That's not bad. But Cam Ward's a fascinating case. Before he signed with Wazoo, there were rumors that he was going to because of the Morris connection. And so, I did what a lot of people probably did at the time, and I scoured YouTube and the World Wide Web trying to find tape, which was not very easy to find from Incarnate Word. And what I did ultimately find was dark and grainy and looked like it was shot on an old VHS camera. Sorry, there's a delivery here behind me.
That's all right.
But I remember being absolutely blown away by what I saw initially. It kind of reminded me of when you go on Huddle and you watch high school tape when you find out about a guy we signed. Quickest release I have ever seen. Like, he gets from setup to release is as quick as I've ever seen. And that got him in trouble at times. Sometimes it's too quick, and he would tend to sail the ball a little bit. And his feet he'd throw it flat-footed a little bit. The mechanics wouldn't marry up. That's gotten better, and I thought he took another leap forward at Miami last year. And to me, that's the thing that impresses me the most about Cam is he got better every year while making 2 significant jumps in competition, and then all the other stuff that goes along with it. I think he's a guy that has that perfect blend of confidence and borderline cockiness, like arrogance in his ability, but also, humble enough to be a leader and get guys on his side. He's a really, really good teammate. Staying the second year at Wazoo, I think said a lot about him. I have no knowledge of of concrete offers that he may have gotten, but I'm certain that he would have had opportunities in the transfer portal if he had gone in at that time. And so I didn't hold it against him when he left. It is fun to watch, and I do think it speaks to the fact that you cannot look a year ahead and say that that a certain quarterback class is going to be a certain way, and that maybe you can count on that and plan around it, because the guys at the top sometimes fall. Sometimes they stay in school, they don't come out when you want them to, or they get hurt, or they regress. Guys like Carson Beck, we may never really hear from Carson Beck as an NFL prospect again.
I have one for you. Jevon Sneed, which rest in peace, Jevon Sneed.
Oh, my goodness.
Ole Miss quarterback, pro-style offense, presumed like in contention for the number 1 overall pick, goes undrafted. Was like preseason considered a front runner for the number 1 overall pick to undrafted. I think Andre Woodson from Kentucky is like another similar guy who I think he got drafted like 5th round-ish. But like a guy who was in contention for the number 1 overall pick, and then it falls off completely.
I'll give you two recent examples. Sam Howell. Sam Howell, after his sophomore year at North Carolina, was a first-round draft pick. And then, all his skill position guys went to the NFL, and he didn't have as good a year, and he had to run the football about as much as he threw it, and his profile dipped. Plus, teams get more tape, and, you see the flaws. Tyler Van Dyke's another one. I don't know if you remember the freshman year he had at Miami 2 years ago. He looked like an NFL prototype, and the guy that was on that arc. And, now he's at Wisconsin. He's not even starting. He's been banged up and probably will never be a pro. But the flip side of that is, Cam Ward's not the first guy to go from being a player that you didn't think was going to be a pro. And I looked back. This is funny. I looked back at my own Twitter profile the other day because I like to look at my own history of takes on players sometimes. And there was one tweet from 2023, I think, where, and this is just the Coug fan coming out in me, he must have done something in the game that pissed me off. And I said, Cam Ward's not a pro, not on any given day. Is he a pro quarterback? And then, a year and a half later, I was singing his praises. But Jaden Daniels is another example. I remember clearly him beating us, and by us, I mean WSU, when he was a true freshman in Arizona State, but he did it with his legs in sort of a, do you remember the game the Seahawks played at Tampa when Byron Leftwich was the quarterback? And he just absolutely destroyed us. And it was the game of his career, right? He had never done that to anyone else. And Daniels had a game like that. And I thought he was way too raw as a passer, never going to be an NFL player. And I didn't think anything of it at the time until he transferred to LSU 2 years later. And I thought, wait a minute, Brian Kelly wants him? That made no sense to me. And then 2 years later, he's the second pick in the draft. And he only wasn't the first pick because, a generational prospect was ahead of him. So it can happen. You can never look ahead. People are already saying it. Pete Prisco, for crying out loud, tweeted today, don't worry about quarterbacks this year. Wait till next year. You'll be fine. Pete Prisco's been doing this for a long time. He should know better.
Yeah, well, I mean, even look at the last year's draft class. 3 of the 6 guys are that same redemption arc that you're talking about. Like Michael Penix obviously plays at Indiana and is fine, but he's injured a bunch and becomes this like high volume passer at Washington and ends up obviously improving his stock a ton. Bo Nix is the same deal. A guy that kind of flamed out at Auburn and comes to Oregon and they find an offense that he can run. And I mean, I had every doubt in the world about Bo Nix, and he turned out to have a pretty good rookie year, at least then, like you mentioned, Daniels. And then there's the 3 other guys, right? Caleb Williams and Drake May and J.J. McCarthy, all highly recruited, highly rated guys. Those guys are obviously also, it may be easier to project like there's going to be more of those guys coming out next year, but there's only one Arch Manning, and you got to hope as a Seahawks fan, the Seahawks are in no place to be drafting Arch Manning next year.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I've been saying this for months, and I'm going to stick to it. I don't think Arch Manning comes out in 2026.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I just don't. I think he's going to want to play more than one full season as a starter. He doesn't need the money. It's going to be there for him. I don't think he comes out. I really don't.
Let's talk about this offensive line because obviously a lot of the fan base's anxiety over the offseason so far has been about there's no answer at left guard, there's no answer at right guard, and certainly the coaching staff knows a lot more than we do about how good Christian Haynes will be and how good Satua Lamea will be and how good Mike Jarrell will be or Olu Oluwatimi. The guys that are there right now, Anthony Bradford, just I would say, I mean, they know better than I do. Feels like a bad fit, but
Yeah,
you'd like to
he
see them
does.
add.
He does, but then Schneider name dropped him on his
Sure,
radio show 2 weeks ago as a guy that he thinks gets to the second level and hits people. So
sure.
we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a position where it seems to me like there's a good chance, like going into the third round, Seahawks Twitter is going to be on fire, like burning to the ground, and they're going to draft somebody who ends up being the presumptive starter, but that is not a sexy name. Because everybody's pointing at Gray Zabel. I tend to, I know you do a lot of listening to John Schneider also. I tend to believe, I think he's pretty steady on his opinion of how valuable interior offensive linemen are and should be. And I think I think a lot of the great interior offensive linemen have come from either tackles who've moved in or have been drafted in later rounds. This is not a position that you absolutely have to draft in the
Right.
first round to get effective talent, and I think he's aware of that, and that's part of it. My question for you is, there's a lot of talk about Gray Zabel at 18, a lot of talk about Tate Ratledge in the second round, or potentially the third round, but I think probably the second round is the most likely.
Yeah.
What's the gap between and also, by the way, there's no guarantee that the Seahawks are interested in either of those guys, even though they may fit a profile that we see. But they seem to have a different grading system than a lot of teams. Analysts are often shocked at the way the Seahawks apparently have their draft board ordered. What's the gap between Gray Zabel and Tate Ratledge?
It's very, very thin, very thin,
Okay.
and that's why when I tend to do mock drafts, I go with another premium position in the first round because the drop off at some of those positions is much more severe than it is offensive line. And I'll do your listeners a favor if, in what I would deem the worst case scenario, not from a football perspective, but from a fan perspective and the backlash that I'll have to deal with, as someone who does this, kind of the downside of the draft being 3 days long now is if they don't do what you want on any particular day, you have to sit on that for 24 hours. But if they don't take an interior offensive lineman in the first round, to me, you can make a million different arguments of why it makes sense. And that's typically the approach that I take when I do mock drafts. And I do feel like the fan base has gotten a little bit more educated and sophisticated as the months have come along, and more of them agree with me. Although someone picked a fight with me today because I put my list out last night of guys that I really would be comfortable with at 18, and I didn't have enough offensive linemen on it, and the guy thought I was crazy. But that difference between Zabel and Ratledge, they're very similar players in a lot of ways. Their mentality, right, the way that they play the game, kind of that nasty streak that the Seahawks lack. I think we need that in this, whoever they select in this draft, is much, much thinner than it is between, say, pick a position group, defensive tackle, a Derek Harmon at 18, and what you're going to get at 50 is like this, right?
Yeah, a guy you've talked about a lot is Kenneth Grant. Can you
Yeah.
can you quantify for me as best you can the difference between Kenneth Grant and who I think would be the next like nose tackle is Alfred Collins from Texas? Is that the next like true nose? What's that gap compared to the gap between Zabel and Ratledge?
That's a great example, and it's actually the exact example that I used in discussing this issue with this person earlier today. Is a Kenneth Grant, a Derek Harmon at 18 has all pro upside if they hit their ceiling, right? Alfred Collins' ceiling is as maybe he gets to where he's an every down player, but he really profiles as an early down run stuffer type with a little bit of upside as a pass rusher, but not nearly what you're going to get from Harmon and Grant. So those are really good examples of, like, if you want this to be a trench draft and an identity draft, interior defensive line and edge is a need for me. And you need to add there some guys that really get you closer to where you want to be as far as how you want to play football under Mike McDonald. And you're just not going to get nearly the same upside in a player at that position in the second round as the first. Whereas, as much as I would be immediately excited if Gray Zabel's a pick at 18, because I do think he's a perfect fit, I would be just as excited if the pick is Tate Ratledge in the second round. There's some other guys that fit in there too. You could probably substitute Jonah Savanaya into this conversation for me, and I'd feel okay with it. And there's some other guys as well. But again, that just plays right into the argument, right? That there are 3 or 4 choices there on day 2. And if you get into the third round, maybe even more than that, it just points out the depth in this interior offensive line. And I would also say to fans, who else agrees with John Schneider on the value of interior offensive linemen and when they should be drafted and when most of the good ones are? The rest of the league.
Sure.
All the GMs and head coaches, right? They all feel generally the same way. Tackles, different story. You look at the all-pro list every year, and usually those are first-round guys. You look at the best interior offensive linemen, and they're almost all taken after the first round.
Yeah. So to me, my preference, if they were going to draft an offensive lineman in the first round, is that they would be also insurance for Abraham Lucas being injured or Charles Cross potentially not. I mean, I assume they're going to pick up or give him his or accept his 5th-year option, whatever the terminology is. I don't know why it's escaping me right now, but so I would like a guy that could also could play left tackle, and I think realistically, the first round candidates for that are pretty slim. Most of the guys who are nominal tackles are actually the guys who you think might be the greatest guards in the first round, like Will Campbell. I think probably could be one of the best guards in football. I'd be scared of putting him at left tackle. I'm a big Armand Membu guy, probably a little more raw than Will Campbell, but you just have to have certain physical traits. You can't play center in the NFL or in the NBA if you're 6'1", right? Like it's never going to work. Armand Membu to me is the only guy with like a high first round projection that actually could play left tackle potentially, and even there's some question marks around that. Can I run a couple guys by you to see if you think they fit that? Like they could be 1, a fit for the Seahawks, and 2, like adequate insurance for Charles Cross in particular. And then, I mean, I kind of trust most of these guys could take over for Abe Lucas with some level of effectiveness. I'm not downgrading it. I think Abe Lucas is incredible. But, okay. So Josh Connerly is a guy that's high on my list.
I like the athleticism. I worry about the anchor with him.
Sure.
I saw him lose too many reps at the Senior Bowl, and I'm not just talking about the Mike Green one. I thought he got really unlucky on that one. He was trying to jump set. He got caught with his feet in the air. It wasn't that he couldn't stand up to Mike Green. I just wonder about the play strength with him. But it's funny. He's a really good example of, I don't know, that the word draft fatigue or prospect fatigue gets thrown around a little bit, maybe too casually. I'm not sure if that's it. But early in the process, I really liked him. I just, the more I watch this tape and then seeing him in Mobile, he just seems like he would be more of a developmental project. I think it's a mistake sometimes to just assume that guys that have played tackle can play guard, but
that's fair.
in an outside zone scheme, maybe he can. He's only 305. He does run well. He moves really well. Maybe he's a better guard than a tackle, and I do think he's one of those guys that's really gotten lost in the shuffle. I'm glad you brought him up because he just doesn't seem to get talked about as much as these other guys. He's sort of hiding behind. It's almost like the Homer Simpson meme, right? Where he just backs into the bush. It's like Connerly was being talked about as a potential first-round pick, and maybe it's perception, and people remember the Mike Green rep, and they're like, I don't know about that guy. But he's also a local kid. It'd be kind of cool to bring him home, and I think he would fit. I wouldn't have the confidence in some of these guys that you're talking about, that profile that you fit, and I'm with you. I would love to take a guy that can do either. And I'm sure you're going to get to some of these other names here, but to bring Connerly up as the first one is interesting because I'm just not sure that he would be a sure thing to step in as a rookie and start at left guard. I don't know that it'd be a slam dunk that he would beat out LeMaya, Haynes, whoever they flip over there, or even a guy that they take on day 2 or 3. He would be a guy more so that you put in the competition, but he's your primary backup at left tackle and maybe a guy you develop more longer term. Whereas some of these other guys, I'd feel much more comfortable plugging him in on day 1.
Yeah, I mean, I might have a little bit of an eye for controversy because I just don't hear a lot about Josh Connerly, and I think like you look at the measurables, you look at the scouting reports, you look at I mean, I'm not grinding tape like you are, and like a lot of the folks that are writing these scouting reports are, but they seem to match what the Seahawks might want. And a guy that he's got the like length to actually play left tackle, which is the weakness of Will Campbell's game.
Right.
There's a couple others. I think obviously you brought up. There's going to be a couple obvious ones. I think people are going to talk about Tyler Booker. They're going to talk about Kelvin Banks is another one. I like Kelvin Banks. I'm not. I'm like, I had to like reset my entire perception. I had a sports blog for like 10 years. Okay. I used to get comments. People disagree with you like 80% of the time on sports analysis, especially the draft. It's like you're not going to get I mean, there's 8 different guys the Seahawks might draft, so that means I should only expect to like make people happy 12.5% of the time or whatever. But he's like, you get to this spot and Tyler Booker's available. You draft Tyler Booker. There's no question. And I'm like, well, I don't even think he's going to be. I mean, I think he's probably in the late 50s or maybe off the Seahawks board just on measurables.
Yeah, I don't think he's a scheme fit. I love the leader, love the dude, and in that way, if we were going to play a gap scheme, he'd be my number one guy. I think because he embodies all that other stuff that you look for. I just don't think he's an ideal scheme fit in a year where there are a bunch of others who are.
Sure. Yeah. How about Kelvin Banks?
I like Kelvin Banks a lot. And there are some who think he can be a better guard than tackle. I don't pretend to be an expert talent evaluator on offensive line play to be able to discern that. But he is kind of built more like a guard than a tackle to me. Like he just looks like a guard. But I like how he gets to the second level. I heard Daniel Jeremiah talking about him on Seattle Sports as not being a guy that looks to finish like all the way till the whistle, which is interesting. Like maybe I didn't watch the same games he did, because I saw reps where he was looking to punish guys at the second level and bury him into the ground. I really like his combination of being able to move, real smooth mover, but also having power. But then, I'm not so sure that I don't like Donovan Jackson just as much, and you can get him a few ticks later, maybe even on day 2. He's one of those borderline guys and get a little bit more value there. So he's certainly one that I think's in consideration at 18. And I would like it for the exact same reason you talk about, because if we get to week 1 and Charles Cross pulls a George Fant and he gets hurt 12 snaps into the season and goes down, like Josh Jones is probably your first choice. And there's things to like about him, but he's a real unknown. I don't think Michael Jarrell's a left side player. So to have a guy, even if he's your starting left guard on that day 1, which I think Banks or Jackson, someone like that would be, just knowing that, hey, you can kick him out and then bring Satawa Lamea or whoever else in and stick him at left guard, like that's a real luxury and a good one to have. And it's one of the things that I prioritize. I certainly factor that into how I view guys.
I'm going to give you one more offensive lineman that I think fits this mold, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on him. Ariante Ursary has been on my radar for a long time.
I wondered if that was the name of your. No, I kind of thought that's the name you were going to get to, and yeah, I love that ahead of time.
Yeah, no, I didn't give you. I gave you even less specifics than I promised I would yesterday when I was telling you what we were going to talk about. I forgot to give you the list of players. Yeah, I like Ursary a bit. I mean, the measurables are good. He's got. Again, it's like he's a guy who's got the minimum requirements to play left tackle physically. Whether he's got the skills, that's what I'm asking. But like he's at least big enough and long enough to play left tackle. Presumably also play right tackle if he can handle the right side, or if he might be better suited for the right side even.
He looks more like a right tackle, right?
Sure.
He's 330, 335 pounds. Like that's not your typical left tackle in the NFL today, outside of guys like Trent Williams. Because you have to be more mobile and you have to have that lateral movement ability. But I thought he held up really well at the Senior Bowl, going up against a pretty good group of pass rushers there. He's really stout. He's really strong. He's really experienced. I think he's a 3-year starter, and he's been durable, and he's got the long arms and all the things you look for in a left tackle. I haven't ever seen him play guard. They didn't even give him guard reps in Mobile because they had so many of those interior guys that they were trying to feed. But he certainly moves well enough, even at that size. It's funny, he weighs about the same as Tyler Booker, but moves much, much better. And you saw
Right.
that at the combine and some of those movement skills and bag drills and stuff like that. It's really remarkable how well he moves. And so he's a guy that, again, I don't think has been getting maybe as much attention because analysts aren't projecting him inside the guard. And so fans have kind of dismissed the idea of him. And 18 is probably a little rich, but it's the Seahawks and they grade for their own board, as they always say, or their own roster. And they may have different ideas. And plus, I think this is a good time to talk about the idea of sort of opportunity cost, right? It's not so much about who's worth the 18th pick, but how much you value that player, how much you want them on the roster versus having to sit now and watch 32 picks go by before your next one and what's going to be available then. And if you're sitting at home and you're a draft nerd and you've studied these guys and you think I wouldn't touch Ursary before pick 30, well, you're not going to get him then if he goes at 30, if you don't take him to 18, and then you just have to feel good about what's left on the board after that. So no, I think that's a really intriguing idea.
I even think and a guy that I think some Seahawks fans wanted, I know you were a little lower on him than maybe the average Seahawks fan, but like a less big Mekhi Becton, a guy that's really big but can move a decent amount for his size and maybe is not so big that it feels like it's going to become prohibitive as his career continues. Would be like, maybe not like a straight up comp, but like I think he's got some of that just overt strength and domination ability that Becton has. Okay, we should talk about. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I told you I was going to ask you a follow-up question about Shedeur Sanders. I asked you if he was off the Seahawks board. If he was off the Seahawks board, we probably didn't need to talk about this. You said he's probably not high on it, which I agree with you. I have not been super thrilled about the idea. He came into the draft process. It seemed like there was an argument between him and Cam Ward for the number 1 overall pick. Makes a ton of sense to me that Ward, makes a ton of sense to me that Ward separated himself from that. And then, by the way, you start to look at these guys, the Tyler Shuck, Jackson Dart. I started, I wasn't like intimately aware of Jackson Dart throughout the season, but I pull him up and there's old, remember the Lewin career forecast that Russell Wilson graded incredibly high, higher than Andrew Luck, higher than Robert Griffin III. They were like, it's the highest we've ever measured, but he's 5'10 and a half, so he can't possibly actually be this good. Right. And then he ended up having the best career of those 3 guys. And part of that was like how many starts at high level competition. Jackson Dart has, I want to say it's like 40 plus starts in the SEC I know Lane Kiffin is not running a pro style offense, but it's kind of Sarkish where there's a lot of screen stuff, but there's pro elements to it. Either way, it's an SEC offense, and he's got 40 plus starts from a coach that at least used to coach in the NFL at some level. Like this is, to me, it seems like Dart would be off the charts on that Lewin career forecast. So you have, and again, it will have come out, so I don't feel bad spoiling it. You have Shedeur, I think, 4th. You had him 4th on your. I agree with you completely, and I think nobody is like. It's like there's just enough risk of Deion Sanders seeing this list and calling you out that people are so scared to put him any lower. I would be, if I was the Seahawks. I feel like I would be out on Shedeur. How far? Like, at what pick would he have to still be on the board? Which I don't think it's going to happen, but like from your perspective, if he's there at 50, or is he top of the Seahawks board? If he's there at 82,
man, trying to put together all the pieces when it comes to Shedeur and figure out what's smoke and what's fire and what's real and what's hyperbole it makes my head hurt. Like I don't know that I ever remember a quarterback prospect, a first round quarterback prospect, that was this polarizing.
Sure.
Where people were, the opinions were so mixed. Just in the last 24 hours, we've heard Mike Tomlin loves Shedeur Sanders and is going to pound the table for him if he gets to 21. And then we've heard his interview went so poorly with the Steelers that he's not, quote, not going to be a Steeler. How much of that is subterfuge, right?
Right.
And just kind of playing the chess game. As far as the Seahawks go, I just don't think he exhibits those Seahawk qualities. And with all of the intangible stuff being in question, the fact that they didn't meet with him at the combine and they haven't had him in for a 30 visit, like when you're talking about the quarterback position, you're not going to try and play games with that. You're going to try to get to know the guy as well as you can. And I think he fits that. John Schneider talks a lot about the reason that they bring these guys in and they like to bring them in. And this is an interesting point of conversation this week because there's been a lot of talk about how the Rams don't do 30 visits and now the Jacksonville Jaguars don't because Gladstone's the GM there. Schneider talks about he wants to see them interact with the rest of the staff. How do they treat people? How do they act around the rest of their organization? Because they really value people in that building. And the fact that they didn't bring him in, I think you could be right. He might not be on their board at all. But also, he just doesn't have any elite traits at all.
Mm-hmm.
People talk about his accuracy, but like the ball's not always pretty. And I think he did himself a disservice by working out with Cam Ward this offseason because every time you saw one of those videos, and they became friends and they're giving each other shit, and then you see Sanders throw a football and you see Ward throw one right after him, and you go, yeah, he probably shouldn't have been in the same room. Like that didn't make him look good.
Yeah.
I still, at the end of the day, I don't think he gets out of the first round just because quarterback is such a need. I still feel like Pittsburgh is the best fit there. Or maybe the Browns or Giants moving up slightly to get into the back end of the first round after passing on him early because it looks like now that's going to be the case. So it's a fascinating case study, and I think it'll certainly be one of the storylines of the first round. Absolutely. Those other guys, I'm a big Jackson Dart guy. Have been for a long time. Have been really ever since I had Bruce Feldman on the show preseason, and he talked about how scouts and GMs were telling him that he's going to be a first-round pick. Said the same thing about Cam, by the way.
He said that before this college football season. Oh, nice.
Yeah. I did this in my notes last night in talking about my list. Got better every year, right? His completion percentage went from, I think, top of my head, 61 to 63 to 65 to 69%. Highest rated quarterback in the country last year, but he wasn't doing it with dump-offs and checkdowns. He led the country in yards per attempt at almost 11, right? So he was pushing the ball down the field. I think he was the top-rated quarterback of those in this draft class at big-time throw percentage, which means he's throwing into tight windows. And you can't hold Kiffin's offense against him. He's figured out an offensive scheme that works at the college level that gets guys open on your first or second option. You don't need to go to the third or fourth. But just because you haven't seen him do it doesn't mean he can't do it. And he's another one. He's going to be the last guy to go. I think it comes out the day before the draft. But can't wait to watch his whiteboard work with Gruden. And plus, I talked about how moxie's important. He has it in droves. Like he just has that aura of a quarterback. The guy that walks in the room and you go, oh, that's QB1, right? Like we just know it. And for that reason, I also think he's going to be very, very, very highly graded on the Seahawks board. I think John Schneider is going to love him. I think there's a really good chance that if he's still there at 18, they're going to look up at their board and he's going to be the top graded prospect. And then it'll just be a situation of like, does it make sense? If you had asked me before they signed Drew Lock, I would have said, yeah, it probably does. And not that Drew Lock would prevent them from taking a guy that they think can be a franchise quarterback. I just don't think at this point, I don't think there's any way he gets to 18. And so it won't be an issue.
Yeah. I mean, I was vehemently in favor of the Falcons taking Michael Penix. It's the most important position in sports, arguably. Yeah. It made sense to me. I would have said like, I got into a big argument. I'm in a group chat with like 20 just sports gambling degenerates. And I said I thought it was an okay move. I would have given it a B+. And they've been like, Casey loved the move. He thought it was the best thing they could have possibly done, is what it's turned into in the arguments.
Right.
I thought it was, I give it like a B+. I think you got to throw a ton of resources at it. I agree with you. If they took him at 18, it's going to get mixed reviews. People aren't going to be as excited about it. They're going to think, why would you do this after you signed Sam Darnold? To me, signing Sam Darnold means you're going to try to compete and you're going to try to compete the next couple years. You're not doing a rebuild. And if you're not going to do a rebuild, you better have somebody else also, because if Sam Darnold gets hurt, you have a single point of failure. You better have somebody that can actually step in and maybe be the guy if Sam Darnold is not the guy. I hate this thing they do with quarterbacks where it's like once you bring a quarterback in, you have to pretend like you've never even heard of another quarterback in the NFL. You got to bring in the shittiest backup so he doesn't feel threatened. Like, I hate that. Have the best talent in that room. And if that means this guy is a little bit of a like luxury pick in the first round, it's the best. It's the most important position in all of sports. Draft that guy. I want to talk about
Jackson. I'll tell you what about Jackson Dart. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, you're good.
I do not want Sean McVay to get his hands on that guy. As a Seahawks fan, that would be worst case scenario.
God, now you just gave me nightmares. Real quickly, I'm going to try to squeeze a couple topics in. There's a group of guys that are like they're edge rushers, but they look quite a bit different from each other, right? And I've talked to you a little bit in DMs about this, but I'm curious if you could just assuage my there's a draft bust archetype that looks like Aaron Curry. If you remember, Aaron Curry was like, he could be an edge rusher, he could be an off-ball linebacker. I mean, it's a 4-3 guy. Maybe he was better suited for a 3-4, but the Seahawks drafted him because they were so high on him, and he fails miserably. And then you've talked a lot this offseason about what led to drafting LJ Collier, but LJ Collier was another guy who was like a tweener. He's like, either like an undersized defensive tackle size with some of the traits of an edge rusher or a 4-3 end. There's a bunch of these guys in this draft. Landon Jackson, Elijah Roberts, Jared Ivey, Savion Jones, and then even Abdul Carter, who's obviously going to get drafted significantly higher than the Seahawks have a chance at. But one of Jalen Walker and Jihad Campbell could theoretically make it to the Seahawks. Is there... the more I made the Aaron Curry comp in my mind, wrote off Jihad Campbell and Jalen Walker for that reason. I don't want the guy that's a tweener. And then I started to be reminded over and over again that Micah Parsons was an off-ball linebacker and became one of the most dominant pass rushers in all of football. If you draft, I mean, are there any of those guys that stand out to you as a guy who could come in and become a dominant pass rusher? Because the Seahawks have had an okay pass rush, but they haven't had a dominant pass rusher in a long time.
Yeah, it's one of the more fascinating things about this draft class, and especially where the Seahawks sit at 18 is there's a couple of those types at the top of the draft, certainly, and you mentioned Campbell and Jalen Walker. I'm not altogether convinced. Like, you see him mocked in the top 10, and then you see him falling all the way to 18 because teams aren't quite sure what he is or how to use him. Like, he isn't the prototype that you look for in a stack linebacker, but he also isn't as long as you typically like in an edge guy. But man, there's times on tape where he just takes over football games, and is probably, outside of Carter, the most explosive guy as far as get off and getting off the line of scrimmage and beating guys to the outside that you're going to find from that position. So what do you do with them? And Jihad Campbell, similar, bigger guy, right? In fact, his physical specs are eerily similar to Micah Parsons. Mm-hmm. Like height, length, weight, speed testing, all of that stuff. Very, very similar. I'm not saying he's going to be that type of player, but they're both intriguing because we know how much Mike Macdonald likes versatility, interchangeability. He likes that hybrid type player. Like, this was not the level of player that Jihad Campbell or Jalen Walker could be, but Malik Harrison and how he used him in Baltimore, we've seen it here in just the 1 year he's been here. We saw times where Drake Thomas was on the field, even though Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight were as well. And there's times that he'll use 3 safeties or he'll use 3 inside linebackers, and one of them is usually up close to the line of scrimmage or as a spy. And the funny thing is, early in the draft process, when I was looking at inside linebacker and opportunities there to kind of improve that group and upgrade over Drake Thomas, who's a guy that they like, I was looking at weak side guys that can run and cover, right? Because I thought that's probably a more complementary skill set as a third linebacker. But the more you study Jihad Campbell, assuming he's healthy, and to a lesser extent Jalen Walker, I prefer Campbell of the two. He is that kind of chess piece, or could be. And I think that's important. It's an important conversation to have, because if the card gets turned in at 18 and that banner flashes at the bottom of the screen on NFL Network and it says Seahawks selected Jahad Campbell, a good portion of the fan base is going to freak out. They're just not going to know what to think. Is Ernest Jones hurt? Are we getting rid of Tyrese Knight? Like, that mentality, I understand it as a fan. When I was a younger fan, I thought that way too. Like, we already have 2 guys. Well, he wouldn't play that role. I asked Corbin Smith about this the other day, and he agreed with me. Like, he'd be interchangeable. He could certainly protect you if Jones were to get hurt. And he actually, at his size, covers well enough that he can even play weak if Tyrese Knight got hurt. But he can also be a guy that rotates in and plays on the line of scrimmage. It plays on the edge. The other thing that's important to note about those 2 guys is they're both like A-plus dudes. They're both dogs. They're both locker room leaders. They're the kind of guys that elevate locker rooms and programs. And so they do exhibit Seahawks qualities. I think they're going to both have high grades. I really do. And they could be in the mix. But there are some other guys. I think if you want to discount Jahad Campbell, you could take a Demetrius Knight on day 2 out of South Carolina. Kind of a similar skill set, you know. I think Donovan Ezeraku, even though he's an edge guy, hasn't played off-ball linebacker with his athletic ability and his frame. I think he could do a little bit of that too. You know, you want more of a sleeper type. I think David Walker is a guy, kind of a smaller school guy, sort of sawed off, not as tall as you want in an edge guy, but he can kind of do some of those things too. So it's an interesting aspect to this class, and it's fun to talk about, because the last couple of years that edge group has been pretty thin, and the defensive line group as a whole too. And it's really one of the strengths of this draft. So there's tons and tons of options. We're going to find out a lot more about Mike Macdonald a week from now and what he looks for in players and how he wants to use them and what he wants to do defensively. We knew exactly the kinds of players Pete Carroll preferred on defense. We looked at arm length, we looked at 40 times, and 3-cone, and height and weight, and we kind of knew there were players that you could cross off your board because they just didn't fit the Pete Carroll archetype. We don't know what it is with Mike Macdonald, and he made it even harder to predict at the Combine when he came out and says he doesn't have a cookie-cutter template that he looks for in his defensive players. So so much of the focus is on what they're going to do on the offensive line and at wide receiver, because the defense is pretty set in a way. Like, the entire starting 11 comes back. In fact, I think there's 13 guys on the roster that started a game last year, maybe more. But they're going to add to that, and they're going to add pieces that fit the Mike Macdonald mold, and we're going to find out more about what that mold is.
I want to talk about a couple of sleeper receivers, four total receivers. One is going to infuriate people because he profiles, I think, just looking at him, looking at the measurables, you think slot. I think he could probably do a little more than that, just on athletic traits. There's 3 big guys, though, that I want to talk about. Savion Williams, I know you've talked about quite a bit. One of the underappreciated things about Savion Williams is 72+% contested catch rate. That's crazy. We were talking about Jackson Dart improving his completion percentage on all passes to 69%, and on contested catches, Savion Williams has he converts those into catches at a higher rate. That's very impressive. I know there's deficiencies in his game. He's maybe not the greatest route runner and is a little bit raw. There's appetite from the fan base for the Seahawks to draft a guy who diversifies the receiver room. That is, and I'm not scared of a receiver room that's all slots, by the way. That's another criticism you get online a lot.
Not in this offense.
You pick another slot, and you just got to think back to that Mike Holmgren era when it's like Derek Mays, Sean Dawkins, Darrell Jackson, Bobby Ingram. Like, it was just slots all over the field. There was everyone was 5'11" to 6'2" and ran good routes, and nobody was like a real burner, and nobody was Joe Juravicius maybe being the one exception, a guy that could really go up and get the ball. But it was a lot of guys who fit the same profile, and you just throw 3 or 4 of them out there at a time. Anyways, but if they were going to go after a guy that was a little bit bigger, there's 3 guys to me that are intriguing athletically. Savion Williams is one of them. Love to hear you talk about him. Deontay Thornton Jr. is another one, 6'5". I think had the best no, not the best, but had one of the best 40 times from a receiver.
Yeah.
And then my guy that I and you can just tell me you didn't end up. I know you've been very busy leading up to this, but Isaiah Nayer is a guy I talked to you about from Nebraska, who I found him. I mean, he's super high on the relative athletic score thing, so I could have found him a different way. But I was just thinking about how long DK Metcalf's arms are. This is what keeps me up at night, Dan, is I'm thinking about how long DK Metcalf's arms are. I look it up. He has remarkably long arms for a receiver. He has left tackle. He has prototypical left tackle arm length. And I was like, well, who are other receivers who have had long arms like that and who have them in this upcoming draft? Yep. Isaiah Nayer has super long arms. Also happens to jump out of the stadium and run super fast. And you're like, well, why has this guy not been incredibly productive? He played at Texas, played at Nebraska, and I'm curious if a diagnosis of why DK Metcalf wasn't productive in college is because a possible diagnosis is he's just too good for college quarterbacks to really be able to take advantage of his strengths, to get him the ball downfield where he has. I don't know if that's legitimate, but that's like, if I was going to apologize for his lack of production, that would be one of the things I would consider. That would be a hypothesis I would run through. Is there anything of that with Nayer? Did you end up getting a chance to watch him? Okay. That's all right.
I didn't, but I will now. And I love, especially at this point in the process. I've had a bunch of viewers and listeners, give me names over the last month or so and I get to go watch them. It's kind of cool. I had one viewer turn me on to Anthony Armstrong from Arkansas, who's another bigger receiver, really long arms, not as fast though. That's not his game. So I haven't gotten a chance to get to Nayer, but I will. Savion Williams is a really fascinating player for me. I'm not worried about the rawness because that was the knock on DK coming out, right? He just wasn't an accomplished route runner. And with him more specifically, it was concerns about his short area quickness. Like, can he develop that ability? And he never did, but he didn't need to because there are other ways that he wins. Interestingly enough, you bring up the arm length, and that was one of the real knocks on DK and one of the frustrating aspects of his game is he never developed or maybe he just wasn't willing to high point the ball. That just wasn't his game. He's a body catcher and a pretty darn good one in traffic, especially in big moments. But you'd always just wish that he could just run a fade, right? You throw it in the corner of the end zone, let him go get it. Savion Williams has so much to work with. And, the versatility aside, like even if he had never taken a direct handoff before and hadn't played that running back stuff that makes him look so much like Cordarrelle Patterson to me, or at least what Cordarrelle Patterson became in the NFL. 6 rushing touchdowns, 6 receiving touchdowns, I think, at TCU last year. And I don't even know who the TCU quarterback is, but imagine that luxury with, what'd you say, 72% contested catch rate?
Yep.
And he also had Jack Besh to throw to, and his was similar. In fact, Besh said at the Senior Bowl he doesn't consider them 50-50 balls. He considers them 75-25 balls. But there's one rep that sticks out to me with Williams where he's running a post route, and he's pretty wide open, and the quarterback throws it behind him. He's running full speed on a post route. Quarterback throws a full tick behind him, and he's able to contort his body while his momentum is taking him towards the goalpost and reach back behind him and, gets off his feet, contorts his body backwards, makes the catch for a touchdown. Really, really remarkable. I know he was a 30 visit, and if he checked those boxes that, where he fits in as a Seahawk, I could absolutely see him being the pick on day 2 because I imagine that they feel like with JSN and with the addition of Cooper Kupp, that they have a little bit of a soft landing available, and with MVS being there as the veteran, where they don't need to count on him as a rookie.
Right.
No matter who they draft, they don't need to count on him as a rookie. They could take Teteroa McMillan or Emeka Ibuka at 18, and they won't be counting on him to play 60% of the snaps. They're going to let his development curve kind of dictate to you how much you use him. A guy like Williams would be a whole lot of fun to get in that room and start teaching him an NFL route tree. Because in the interim, when you're in the red zone, you could stick him in there and say, run to the pylon, and I'm going to throw it up and you go get it. There aren't many guys in the draft who have that kind of upside.
Sure. And do you have any thoughts on Deontay Thornton?
Thornton seems to really be rising. I had never heard of him until he ran his 4.3 at the combine.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things about the combine. There are always a couple of guys at each position group, small school guys or whatever, that just test so well. You go, geez, I got to go look at that guy. Who's that?
Yeah.
But when you're 6'5" and 6'5" and sturdy, like he's a first off the bus type of guy. Like sometimes those tall, fast guys are rail thin. He's not that. Ran a limited route tree at Tennessee with those really wide splits and all of that. I think he led the country in yards per catch.
It's like 20 plus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He looks like a guy that I thought in the positional drills, he looked really good. He looked like a more accomplished route runner, or that he had that potential skill set than a DK Metcalf. We keep going back to him. But you talk about a guy that can take the top off at least. You stick him out there, and even if he's not fully developed as a rookie, like the other team's going to know, oh shit, I got a 6'5", 4.3 guy on the outside, and it's hard to imagine anyone else in this draft on day 3, in particular, that could kind of be that ideal sort of understudy to what Valdez-Scantling can give you.
Right.
As a bigger bodied receiver, because there is a role for that in this offense, even though you don't need a guy like that. Have the Rams had a guy like that? Have they had a 6'5", 4.3 guy the whole time McVay's been there? No, they have guys like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua and Robert Woods, who don't fit that profile at all.
All right, I'll let you whatever time you're willing to give me to talk about your sleepers. I brought up mine. Nayer's my guy that's probably not going to get drafted, but I think is going to be really interesting. I will be curious if you do watch him, if you'll let me know what your thoughts are. I will say Bryce Coots gave me his notes on him, and they were like kind of what you'd expect, right? Like not a great route runner. It's similar to what DK's cons would be. Were not a great route runner. The speed doesn't always translate. Not productive at all, by the way. Like it's remarkable how unproductive he was. And especially as a guy, DK's got some hands issues and some inability to make hands catches issues.
Right.
This guy does not seem to have that and just never could figure out how to put together like a truly productive season. So I would like to hear your sleepers. You've talked about a fair amount of them, but you said you had a couple extras to.
I really like Isaac Tesla from Arkansas. I saw him at the Senior Bowl. He was a late ad because of some players that pulled out. Didn't know who he was. Then I saw him with his helmet off. He looks 12. He looks like a 12-year-old. But he just kept getting separation in the one-on-ones, and he kept making plays. I think he had a couple of plays in the game. I think he had a 2-point conversion and another big catch. 6'2". You blink and you have to check the 40 time when you see him run it. But I think did he clock under 4.4?
I think that's right.
He ran well. Testing was good, explosive testing, the jumps, really good hands, good route runner. Just didn't have a lot of volume at Arkansas and had zero name recognition. So that's a guy that I like. Armstrong is another guy, same school, but different body type, 6'2", really long arms. The best hands catcher I've seen in this class. Like he plucks the ball, plucks it on the run and on the move. And also I'd put him right there with Alec Manor from Stanford as far as his blocking ability. Like you can tell watching the reps where he's not the intended target, like he goes looking for action. He likes to block, and that's going to have a lot of value in this offense. And then Pat Bryant's another one from Illinois who might be a little bit more of a recognizable names. A bunch of my viewers have kind of been talking about him for a couple of months, and he did go to the Senior Bowl, and sometimes that makes it hard to be a sleeper. Only ran a 4.6 at the combine. That's a concern. It's 6'2.5", but he doesn't look like a 4.6 guy on tape. And the short area stuff, like the 3-cone and short shuttle, was good. But another guy right there, outstanding hands catcher. And once he catches it, like surprising run after the catch ability. And another guy that at Illinois, where they They only throw the ball 55% of the time. Like, they run it almost as much as they throw it. The quarterback play was painful to watch at times. There was a corner route that I saw just the other day watching Bryant, and he got separation. He was open on it, and the ball fell on the turf like 4 yards behind him, and the quarterback had no pressure. And yet he had 1,000 yards receiving and 10 touchdowns. 6 of those were over 20 yards. I think that might have led the country. He's another guy too that I think would be surprisingly close to being ready to contribute as a rookie, even though he's probably a day 3 guy.
Tesla, by the way, 4.43 40, but
Okay.
jumped 39.5 inches.
Yeah.
Relative athletic score is through the roof, 9.93. Who is
Right.
the guy? You just said it, and I heard you say it on your show a couple weeks ago. Who did you say is the best blocker, the best receiver, best blocking receiver?
That's Io Manor
Okay.
from Stanford. Yeah.
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 Okay.
A guy that I don't think's being talked about enough as a day 2 pick. 6'2". He's fast enough. He can play that X. He's a true outside receiver. Really tough and physical. Loves to block. You can see it in the contested catches. He's had some drop issues. But one of the things I saw a scouting note the other day. He has such long arms. He has like 34 plus inch arms that most of his drops happened on body catches because he's just trying to figure out. It's like Ricky Bobby, right? I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with my arms. They're too long. And so, but catching it away from his body and going up and getting it, he's about as good as they come too. Plus, I suspect that he's probably got a pretty decent guy on his side who has connections to VMAC, who's pounding the table for him, and Doug Baldwin,
Sure.
trying to get another Stanford guy in there. But yeah, he's another one of those guys that's real physical.
Jalen Lane. You got any feelings on Jalen Lane?
Another guy that is a better receiver than I think he's getting credit for in the rankings because that passing offense was really terrible. Because there's another DeQuan Felton's another guy from that same school, right? Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Are we talking Virginia Tech?
Virginia
right?
Tech. Yep.
Yeah.
You're right.
Really, really smooth mover. Liked what I saw in Mobile. Didn't do anything in the game, but I thought he looked pretty good in some of the practices. There's a bunch of guys like that. Ty Felton out of Maryland's another one that fits into that group on day 3 that, man, you watch the tape and you wonder why, he's 6'2", really smooth, runs good routes, catches the football well. Like, why isn't this guy being talked about? Sometimes you just don't get an opportunity to stand out in college because you're not in a high volume passing offense, right? But then if you play in a high volume passing offense, right, you play at Oregon or you play at Ole Miss, and then you get knocked because, well, you're schemed open. You didn't gain that separation on your own. It's like,
sure,
people are never happy sometimes.
Do you have any sleepers at other positions? By the way, I did not intend to just talk about wide receiver sleepers, but I know if I pull the string, you'll just keep going. So I don't want to. I have a couple guys at running back. If you're so Basil Tootin from also Virginia Tech, which that Virginia Tech team, by the way, so fun. Much speed for a team that had the offensive output that they had, and then Brashard Smith out of Southern Methodist, that converted receiver. I liked Tyrone Tracy last year. That ended up looking great. I have a lot of skepticism about the value of running backs, but I like a guy that's a former receiver because you assume that guy can run a couple routes and catch the ball, which is valuable. It's the versatility I'd like to see out of that position.
Yeah, and I will say this: I'm down to about 6% battery power right now.
All good.
Where I'm at, and I don't have any place to plug in. But the running back position's an interesting one to talk about because we just don't know how they view it. Right? Mm-hmm. It's a deep room already. Like, I guess it would come down to, I do think they'll carry 4 on the roster this year because Clint Kubiak likes to use 2 running backs more than any coordinator we've had in a while. But do they like any of these guys more than they like George Halani? And if they do, can he return kicks? I think that's really what it comes down to. Can he do something else that can give us some value right now? Now, you can throw that out the window once you get to the 7th round. But those guys you mentioned are really explosive. They're really quick twitch. They're fits in the outside zone. Pass protection is always going to be an issue. They're both kind of undersized guy, but you know what? I've stopped factoring that in as much into how much I like or don't like a running back because none of these guys, outside of Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, none of these guys really come out as accomplished pass protectors. It's just not. They're just not asked to. Colleges don't care about developing that part of their game. Because they're not going to use him that way. But then another guy that I see him ranked in the 30s in that running back group over and over. I see him going in the 7th round over and over and over again. Is Donovan Edwards out of Michigan, and I just don't understand it. He looked every bit the player that he was 2 years ago on the field at the combine. He looked that way in Mobile to me. Don't know what happened at Michigan and why the production fell off after a 1,000-yard season as a sophomore. He's such an accomplished pass catcher that Jim Nagy said down in Mobile that some teams view him as a guy that could play full-time slot receiver. But, the Washington Huskies certainly know what he can do as a running back, too, from that national title game. I don't know what's happened to him or why he's fallen down. Maybe it's just a product of the quality of the class overall. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes you get enamored by the new guy as opposed to the ones that have been around for a while. But he's another guy, even though he's a bigger name, so you might not think he's a sleeper. He certainly is when you look at the rankings. And, I would add a guy in the 7th round if I could, especially if he had something else to contribute, because we don't know what's going to happen with Kenneth Walker after this year, if they're going to want to pay him, if he's going to be able to stay healthy, if he's a guy even that Mike Clint Kubiak and the guys on that staff feel like is an ideal fit. We're going to find out a lot.
Right on. Well, I'll let you go. I will say, Brashard Smith returned kicks in all 4 seasons, 3 in Miami and 1 at SMU. So maybe that's guy to keep an eye on. He's also the converted receiver. So that's interesting. Yeah. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon in the Arizona mild temperature.
Yeah, I'm loving it. We're here for a couple more weeks, then we move on to West Virginia for a few months, and then hopefully back to Seattle in time for training camp, and wink, wink, hopefully some credentials in hand as well. So
hell yeah. Is that, well, I'll talk to you about that off the podcast. We don't need
right. All right. Fingers crossed.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
Always good talking to you.